Hi everyone, it's Kerry back again today. I quite often get asked what is the difference between a stencil and a mask. So today I'm going to explain the difference between those two, and then I'm going to show you how I made these samples using both stencils and masks, and some easy ways that you can get nice crisp images using both stencils and masks. So what I have in front of me is a stencil and a mask. So basically the stencil is the sheet of plastic or stencil film that has a hole cut into it, and when you apply mediums through the hole and remove the stencil, you'll get the impression of whatever the shape of the hole is. A mask is basically the exact opposite. So if you were to apply a medium over this, you would be left with a negative image underneath of this flower. Before I show you how to make these samples up here using stencils and masks, I just want to talk a little bit about the tools that I prefer to use when stenciling. So most of us will have these round foam blending tools. And you can use these with stencils, but over time they can damage both the stencil and the foam. So what happens with a stencil that has, sharp details or lots of fine detail, like this one has the sharp corners on the edge of the leaves here, is when I'm going over the top with the foam, it's actually catching on those sharp pieces, and it can pull little pieces of the foam blending tool away. So a couple of, I've got a little piece there, and there's actually a piece that's gone underneath the stencil there. And not only will that not give me a nice crisp image, because the stencil will be moving where the foam is pushing against it, but when these little flaky bits of foam come off, if they then go onto your page, they can give you a like a little squiggly line, because those little pieces of foam are still full of ink, and if you accidentally brush it with your hand, then you'll end up with a smudge on your page. So I prefer to use these brushes. They won't get caught on those sharp pieces because it's a bristle, so it'll just move to the side when the stencil pushes against it. So I just load the brush the same way, and then I just go in a little round circular motion over the top, and because the bristles are a lot finer than the foam, they get right into the very tiniest corner, and you end up with a nice crisp image. This one's still fairly crisp, but I think this one's a little bit more crisp. Now it's different again when you're using a mask, because if you use the foam blending tool over the top of the mask and you try and move the foam side to side, it's just going to move the mask, and then obviously you're not going to have a very nice image at all. It's going to be covered with blurry bits. So you can go in with your round blending tool and pounce, and you'll get a better image, but because you're using the round foam, it's kind of acting like a round stamp, and you get lots of sort of ring marks around the edges of your where you've sort of pushed down and pounced with the foam. When you use the brush, you still do a dabbing motion, but because the bristles give you, they're a little bit more forgiving, you don't end up with those sort of round blobby marks. It's a lot more soft, and you can just build up the ink as much as you like until you're happy with the colour. So I think you get a much sort of nicer blend using the brush. So to make this tag here, I've used one of our laser engraved tags, and I'm using a stencil. I look through the stencil and decide where I would like the leaf to be, and then using my brush I just prime it with a little bit of ink, tap it off into the lid, and then I always tap off first onto the page. It just gives me a more blended brush full of ink to start with. Now because this first leaf that I'm putting down, I want it to be in the background, so I'm only going to do, you know, a light covering over this one. I'm just firmly holding the stencil down between my fingers and the table. So when I take that away, you can see it's a nice crisp image. And then I want to put another leaf over the top, and I want this one to be a bit darker so that it looks like it's, you know, sitting in front of this other leaf. So I'm just eyeballing so my stalks line up at the bottom here, priming my brush with some more ink, and then back over the top. Now I'll be going over this one a lot more heavily because I want this one to appear to be at the front of my tag. So a nice good covering of ink and nice crisp image there. And that's pretty much all there is to it. To finish it off, I just do a little bit of stamping. Just got a little script stamp here. And a little postmark stamp. 1, 2, and that's that one done. So to create this tag, I've used these 2 masks. Now, if I was to use this one mask and then pop my ink over the top and then move my leaf and then pop my ink over the top like we did with this stenciling, you would actually end up covering up your masking. So if I mask here and then dab the ink and then move to put more ink over here, I'm actually covering up the first lot of masking with ink, so I don't get the 2 nice crisp images. So that's why I'm going to use two different leaves for this one. So I'll pop that one up a bit more. And I'm just lining up my leaves so that my stems meet at the same place. Now I've probably already got enough ink on my brush. I'll just dab in a little bit, but then I'm going to dab off my brush so I can make sure that my ink is nice and blended on my brush. I'm not going to get big blobs. And then I'm just going to lightly pounce over the top. Now when you're pouncing over the top of a mask, quite often you think there's not very much ink there and you're not going to see much of an impression, but it's very deceiving. So that doesn't look like there's really a lot of ink on there, but when I move it away you can see very clearly the image there. So that's as simple as that. Again, just to finish off the tag, a little bit of stamping. And a postmark. And that's that one. Sometimes you might want to use your stencil and your mask together to get another look. If you're going to use a stencil but you still want to have a nice white crisp area where your mask has been, you'll need to use them at the same time. If I was to go ahead and use my stencil first and just apply ink through my stencil and then apply my mask over the top, go in with my mask and dab ink over the top, I don't get a nice clean crisp image where the mask has been, because we did the stenciling before we put the mask on and it kind of defeats the purpose. So if you want to achieve something like this, then if you pop your mask down first, and what I've got here is just a very small amount of blue tack. Now if you're going to use blue tack or masking tape or washi tape or whatever, just make sure that it doesn't mark whatever surface you're putting your images onto, So if you're using blue tack, make sure it's not greasy or anything like that. And also make sure that you're able to get it up off the image afterwards. So I've just popped a little tiny bit of blue tack in the middle of this flower, and I'm just going to pop that over the top of my tag, and then I'm going to put my stencil over the top of my masked tag. Now there's a line on the edge of my stencil here, and I need to be careful that I don't go over that with my brush, because if I go over that line, then I'm going to get a very harsh line right in the middle of my tag, and I don't want to do that. So if you're confident that your brush isn't going to go over to the edge of the tag, then you can just hold it there. If you're a little bit worried that maybe you might go over the edge, you could use something like a post-it note here. I've just got these ones. They were in a chuck out bin somewhere. And you can just apply the post-it note over the edge of the stencil, and then when I put my stencil on top of my tag, I've masked off that area there, so if my brush was to go over the edge here, it's not going to get onto my tag. So I'm just going to lift that up a little bit higher. And now I don't want this stenciling in the background to be too dark, because it's supposed to be in the background, so I'm just going to lightly go over, and then I'm going to pick it up and move it and put a little bit on this bottom side of the tag too. And that's plenty. So then I remove this stencil, I don't need that anymore. Then I'm going to go in with my green on top of my mask. I'll just leave it blue tack down there, but I'm going to hold this part with my finger and tapping over the top with my brush. And I want this a little bit darker than the background, because I want this to, you know, stand, I want the flower masked image to stand out quite bright. So that should be enough. Carefully lifting my mask away, and if there's any of your blue tack left over, just carefully get that off. So there we go, so that's a nice crisp image there, and then again just finishing off with a little bit of stamping. And that's another one done. So you can also use the stencil and mask techniques to get a coloured image. You don't have to always have a blank image. So I've chosen my flower stencil here, and because I would like the flower to be blue, I'll just prime my brush a little bit, and then I'm just going to start from the top and drag the colour in to my flower, holding my stencil down, and then I'll go in with brown, again priming my brush. And just blending those colours at the base of the flower there. So there we go, and then if I want to protect the flower so that I can add some background colour, I've just got some blue tack on the back of my mask here, and I'm just going to stick that over the top of the flower. And then I can go in with my background colour around my flower there. I'm just holding the stem down with my finger. and then just gently peel that off, and then I've got a nice coloured flower there, and my colours haven't been compromised because I've masked off the coloured piece before I went in with my other colour. So to finish that one off, you just do a little bit of stamping as well. And there we go. Now on this one I've added a couple of little splashes of water just for a little bit of variation, so you could do that too. So I hope I've explained clearly enough for you the difference between a stencil and a mask, and hopefully given you a couple of tips on how you can get some crisp images using those products. I'll leave links in the description box to both the tags and stencils that we've used today. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.